Hey, it's me, NBZ. 2017 was a year. It happened. It was on a calendar. And in that calendar year, there were some video games released. A lot of them, in fact, some might say too many. Some might say too many good ones. I wrote this list a while ago, and so there have been some other ones that have come out since then that maybe would have been on this list if I could be bothered to write some more. But they didn't, so they aren't. So I'll probably do another video where I shout out a bunch of other games that should have been in this top 10 list. But I need to make this clear. Every game on this top 10 list in any other year would be top 3. That's just how absurd this year is. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy. Here are my top 10 games of 2017. Fire Emblem Echoes Shadows of Valentia. If you told me at the start of the year that a fantastic Fire Emblem remake would only barely scrape into my top 10, I would have called you crazy. But that's the state of this year. Everything was just so damn good. Fire Emblem Echoes is a bold reinvention of the Famicom original Fire Emblem Gaiden, and takes all the weirdness of that original release and keeps it mostly intact. The magic system, where you lose HP for every spell you cast, adds a risk-reward element that heightened the tension of dealing with enemies, and the lack of a weapons triangle gave me more flexibility when taking on large groups. I also loved that the split between ARM and Celica's paths meant that I had 2 distinct armies, and could use every unit if I wanted to without leaving anyone behind. The story, though not groundbreaking, is one of the strongest in the series, with many of the characters getting screen time. The addition of voice acting is something that was sorely needed, and will hopefully be a staple from now on. My favourite addition though is Mila's turn wheel, that allows you to rewind time and remedy a mistake. It's an amazing feature that was almost necessary on some of the harder stages, and gets rid of the problem where I always reset if I lost a character. Overall, it's an excellent remake, and a game in its own right that brought a much needed change of pace to the Fire Emblem franchise. Uncharted: The Lost Legacy. I've always been a fan of Naughty Dog's flagship series and the bombastic, pulpy stories they tell. Last year's Uncharted 4 was a high bar for the series, improving combat, giving us a more tonally serious narrative, and wrapping up loose ends in Nathan Drake's story. But perhaps its biggest weakness was pacing. Uncharted 4 was long, and I enjoyed it, but I couldn't help feel like it overstayed its welcome. The Lost Legacy then feels more in the vein of the PS3 trilogy, while still maintaining the strongest parts of Uncharted 4, and as a result, it's vying with Uncharted 2 as my favourite entry in the franchise. Chloe and Nadine make for a great bristling pairing, who slowly grow to have an endearing relationship. India is a gorgeous setting, and spoke to me personally as someone who knows it and has a heritage in that culture. There were moments so jaw-droppingly beautiful that I actually used a photo mode in a game, something that rarely happens for me. The game even experiments with the Uncharted formula, giving you an open world section where you use an in-world cloth map to navigate. The time spent travelling in the Jeep really gives the characters time to breathe, with casual conversations that add to the ease and naturality of these two women. But most of all, it's paced exceptionally well, never staying in one moment too long, and constantly giving you an interesting environment or show-stopping set piece. It is the culmination of Naughty Dog's work on the franchise, and one of the best action-adventure games I've ever played. Xenoblade Chronicles 2. I played 75 hours of Xenoblade Chronicles 2 in 10 days. That should tell you more than anything how difficult this game is to put down. It's a constant assault of mini objectives and micromanaging, wrapped around a fun anime story and an enormous beautiful world that always had me obsessed with one aspect or another. I love that the inhabitants of each Titan are distinguished by their accents, from the broad Welsh cat people of Gormott to the heavy Scottish imperialists of Morardane. Each race of characters feels unique and memorable, and despite the voice acting being shaky from time to time, helped give the game a flavour that the tropey Japanese voices just don't provide. As a fan of the original Xenoblade Chronicles, the environments didn't disappoint. Although some felt very reminiscent of its predecessor, the new locations are both stunning and wondrous in their own ways. The Inderline Praetorium is a particular standout, with its swelling choral arrangement and clean white aesthetic. It's almost as if someone lifted the Vatican onto the back of a flying dinosaur. And the floating islands of the Lothlorien archipelago are a sight to behold. An astonishingly good soundtrack underscores your travels through these amazing landscapes, and it ranks among my favourites of all time, varying from the quiet, contemplative piano pieces to the upbeat, thrashy battle music. There isn't a weak track on the list. Though I didn't fall in love with the characters as much as the first game, I grew to appreciate the party and their various quirks over time, and felt that they had been through a satisfying arc by the time I reached the mind-boggling conclusion to it all. Despite all this praise, Xenoblade isn't higher on this list because it's also riddled with flaws. The map system is confusing and poorly implemented, the field skill system discourages exploration and grows tedious with all the menu juggling that has to be done, and the main plot is nowhere near as compelling as it should be. But, at the end of the day, it's a Xenoblade game, and as long as I can wander vast expanses for hours and hours, I consider myself pretty happy with it. Persona 5. There is a moment at the end of every dungeon in Persona 5 where you're in position to steal the palace's treasure, and the guitar line of Life Will Change kicks in, and in that very instant you feel an oozing confidence and a rush of adrenaline, now primed and ready to steal the villain's heart. The fact that this part of the game sticks out to me more than anything else should tell you how important the soundtrack is to the identity of Persona 5. From the chill vibes of Beneath the Mask when you're hanging out in the cafe, to the high-octane rhythm of Rivers in the Desert when facing off against the endgame bosses, this is a soundtrack that never lets up. The music also has a style to it that is reflected in the visual design of this game, with its snappy, punchy UI and gorgeously silhouetted menus. Combat is faster, more accessible, and is just simply a sight to behold with incredible animation and polish only befitting a game that is a decade in the making. Organising a social life has never felt so good as you manage and juggle returning DVDs, hanging out with Ryuji, and doing your laundry. It's a feeling that's akin to managing your farm in Stardew Valley, and one that I absolutely adored with greater freedom than Persona 4. And yet, despite all these improvements over its predecessor, why is Persona 5 still only number 7 on this list? Well, for one thing, 2017 is an absurd year, but in the end, the thing that I loved most about Persona didn't quite hit the mark. I like the characters, but didn't fall in love with them like the previous game, and every time they had a scene where the cast would just hang out and have time to breathe, there was always something that got in the way of that enjoyment. Losing out on these moments meant that I have no memories of fun events like the camping trip or the nightclub in Persona 4. However, all that aside, I still thoroughly enjoyed Persona 5, and it is undoubtedly one of the best RPGs of the generation. Danganronpa V3. When the credits rolled on Danganronpa V3, my jaw was on the floor. I was astounded by what I'd just witnessed. The Danganronpa series, with its mix of Phoenix Wright and the Hunger Games, sees you navigating a high school killing game where each mystery is self-contained, and yet all leads to a bigger picture. The third game is no different, and yet it is in this familiarity that the game subverts and toys with the player in a way that only someone familiar with the previous games can be manipulated. I need to make this clear. Do not play this without having played Danganronpa 1 and 2. It's hard to explain why, but the impact of what takes place will be severely lessened otherwise. This is a story about truth and lies, and as such you are constantly questioning everything around you, whether it be character motivations or identities. This notion of lying is even implemented into the courtroom sections, where for the first time you're able to commit perjury and tell a lie in order to get to the real truth of the case. The video game part of Danganronpa has always been its weakest asset, but the various minigames didn't intrude too badly in this entry and weren't as frustrating as some of the previous iterations. The cast of V3, however, is perhaps the strongest yet, with a core crew who feel more fleshed out and well written than before, and a set of supporting characters that all have great individual moments. I was often left guessing at the culprit in multiple cases, and there are definitely some series highlights when it comes to twists and turns. Overall, it's hard to recommend this game unless you are already invested in the series, but as a long-time fan, this game not only delivered, it punched me in the gut and left me lying on the floor, contemplating its final reveal for days on end. Metroid: Samus Returns. 13 years. That's how long it's been since the last 2D Metroid was released. Not only that, but the last one was a remake as well. So Metroid: Samus Returns arrived with a heavy burden of expectation on its shoulders, and one so titanic that I really didn't think it could handle it. But I was happy to be proven wrong. Fundamentally, a remake of the hardest to go back to Metroid game by a studio who had released a less than subpar 2D Castlevania game on 3DS should not have worked. However, with Nintendo's oversight, Mercury Steam was able to put together a game that felt very much like a classic 2D Metroid experience, and the more I played it, the more I enjoyed it. It's not often that I non-stop play a video game, but I 100%ed Samus Returns in 2 days. I practically devoured the thing. It had the abilities and power ramp of Super Metroid, the linearity and action pacing of Metroid Fusion, the wordless storytelling of Zero Mission, and even the good parts of Other M, with a cinematic camera that punctuated Samus's flips and dives as she pumped the various Metroids full of missiles. I also appreciated the addition of the map discovery power that meant I didn't need to look up images on the internet just to complete my 100% run of the world. It still has its problems, from the opening over-reliance on the melee counter to the overabundance of Gamma Metroids. Did they really have to have phases where they ran away to another room, for God's sake? But the more powerful Samus becomes, the more I found myself enjoying blasting through these caverns. Not to mention some of the most memorable and challenging boss fights in the series that were a mix of puzzle solving and just straight up dexterity. It may not be the best 2D Metroid, but it certainly proved that Samus is finally back, and God, am I happy about that. Hollow Knight. It's not often that a game comes along to challenge the crown for my favourite Metroidvania game, but it's a thing that's happening more and more frequently in recent years. Hollow Knight is the most recent contestant, and what an offering it makes. Set in a broken, dark kingdom where various bugs and insects made their homes, it is your job to explore these now infested lands and uncover the story behind what happened, whilst overcoming a magnitude of challenges that lie in your way. Don't get me wrong, Hollow Knight is hard. Like, really hard? But that difficulty was never overbearing, and always left me with the feeling that I could overcome the obstacle in my way. Whether it be a brutal boss fight or a labyrinthine maze, Hollow Knight relishes in letting the player get lost, and yet I was never frustrated by that fact. In fact, getting lost and mapping out your own path is part of the thrill of this game, as unlike traditional Metroidvanias, you can only see new parts of the map once you have traversed them and then reached a save bench to log where you've been. It's a genius design choice that means you aren't constantly in the map screen looking for where to go next, and are rather led by the nose to interesting and curious places. The environments help that fact, as though dark, are all gorgeously drawn and brought to life with thick lines and painstaking animation, as every little piece of the landscape, be it bushes, rocks or fences, break and react to your weapon, adding that sense of a dying, broken world. Each area is distinct in colour palette and mechanics, from the serenely leafy green path to the bright pink shards of crystal peaks. But where Hollow Knight really shines is its combat, that relies on careful study of enemy patterns, lightning-fast reflexes to dodge and jump around them, and split-second decision-making about whether to take an opportunity to heal while being left vulnerable, or to go in for an extra hit or two. The fact that you improve your ability to heal by attacking enemies means there is always a forward momentum to the fights, and it makes for some of the most intense and satisfying bosses I've faced off against in years. Hollow Knight is mysterious, beautiful, smartly designed and brutally challenging, and is easily one of the best modern Metroidvanias I've played. Super Mario Odyssey. Super Mario Odyssey is a joy. I'm not sure there is a better way to describe this game other than pure fun. Now, I've always been more of a fan of the more linear 3D Mario design of the Galaxy games, but Super Mario 64 was my first 3D Mario, and its spirit is alive and well in EAD Tokyo's latest outing. This game revels in its variety, from the vertically verdant steam gardens with its surf rock soundtrack to the chilled beach setting of Bub Lane and its wonderfully wacky squid creatures. I don't know that there is a team more creative in the entire games industry than Nintendo's Tokyo studio. Exploring these spaces for a brief amount of time, finding whatever moons I could, and then moving on to the next one made for one of the tightest, most well-paced, and yet sense-assaulting experiences I've ever had. Jumping from kingdom to kingdom, constantly being surprised by the enemies I could take control of with Mario's hat, and the cool mechanics they introduced was an utter delight. There are whole indie games that could be built around just one of the dozen captures in Odyssey, and yet the adventure never lingers on one for too long. That variety and versatility is what makes Odyssey so special. The game constantly rewards you, no matter how little, for interacting with the world. See a pillar and ground pound it? You'll likely get a coin. See a conspicuous gap in the wall? There's likely a moon behind it. And this happens again and again as you explore and move through these levels. There is an invisible breadcrumbing that Nintendo has nailed in 2017, and it is in full force in Super Mario Odyssey. But perhaps the most important aspect of this game is how good it feels to just move. Running around with Mario and chaining together different moves is such a powerful and satisfying feeling. Long jumping, throwing out your hat, diving onto it to get another jump, and then diving again to cover maximum distance is a technique that takes time to get your head around, but once you've mastered it, it opens up a whole new world of possibilities. The movement is so fluid and flexible that many of the game's challenges that initially seem only achievable with captures are actually possible if you have a mastery of it. Mario Odyssey is a world I love being in, and it's harder for me to give a game higher praise than that. Cuphead. When the world first saw Cuphead for a brief couple of seconds during Microsoft's E3 press conference in 2014, they collectively lost their mind. How could a game look like this? It was staggering. Fast forward to 2017, and Cuphead cements its place as not only one of the best looking games ever made, but also one of the most incredibly challenging yet rewarding games I've ever played. Here's how a boss fight in Cuphead usually goes. Fuck, what the hell is going on? I can't beat this thing. Okay, I can dodge that part by ducking, cool. Alright, phase 1 isn't so bad. Oh god, phase 2! Maybe here is where I should save my super. Not getting hit in phase 1 or 2, but boy, block clenching in phase 3! Please don't get hit, please don't get hit, please don't get hit, please don't get hit! I fucking did it! This is the loop of Cuphead. You see, I don't feel like Cuphead is actually that hard, but its difficulty comes from learning and persistence. Think of it like algebra. I could present you with a long, complicated equation and ask you to solve it then and there, but you wouldn't be able to without analysing it. You'd have to look at all the parts, break them down, fit them together again, and ultimately come up with an answer after putting in the work to get there. That's what Cuphead is. It's a road to be travelled, a book to be read, a problem to be solved, but it is the process of getting to that end that is so incredibly enjoyable. Cuphead feels fantastic to move. Just like Mario in Super Mario Odyssey, he controls exactly how you want him to, with tight, tangible controls that give you every option you need. The parry system adds a risk-reward element that increases the already high tension, and was a fantastic design choice. And, though I've already mentioned it, you can't not be impressed by not only the artistry on display in a Cuphead, but the sheer surprise factor. Every time a boss changes form, the animation is so unbelievably elaborate that you'll want to fight it 10 more times just to see it over and over. And that is the real genius of Cuphead. It's a game I love looking at, and the design of the game is that I will look at it. A lot. Again, and again, and again. The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. It had just turned evening as I exited Impa's house. Her words weighed heavy on me. What had really happened to the world in my absence? What was my place in all this? At the very least, I had some answers and a direction to go in. Hateno Village. Pura. There I would find more. I whistled loudly to Sanjeet as I left Kakariko and waited for his approaching footfall before jumping onto his back at full speed as we tore away. The mountain descent revealed the horizon, a sight I was all too familiar with. A field full of dead guardians. Quiet and beautiful in its own unique way. As we continued to pass through the mechanical graveyard, I felt a familiar sense of déjà vu, but once again, nothing came of it. One day. As I passed through the gates on the other side, we were once again in unknown territory. By now it had grown dark, and the only lights available were fireflies that were native to the surrounding area. I dismounted and followed after a few, hoping to use them for a recipe later. But as I was busy in this task, I noticed another light, a small, flickering torch outside of a remote hut deeper into the forest. Approaching, I saw an old man, who told me about a riddle he was trying to solve that was just about driving him crazy. I looked over his notes and was just as confounded. Telling the old man I'd try my best to help, I left the forest and happened upon an alcove which was riddled with small statues. This was too much for me to figure out right now. I needed to keep moving. I'd get back to it later, I told myself. As we continued forward, another cave-like area caught my eye. I shot down a few bats, taking their parts for later, before coming upon a more mystical foe. A creature that danced on air. How strange. I approached slowly, but before I knew it, a flaming ball of fire was screaming towards me. Dashing out the way, I pulled back my bow and let loose. As the ghostly presence dissipated, all that was left was the tool it had used to try and set me alight. A fire rod. I packed it away, thinking nothing more. As the night dragged on, so did our journey, passing through small streams, by imposing trees and up steep hills, until early into the hours of the morning I spotted another traveller. So rare was it to see someone else in the wild that I flagged them down to see who they were and where they were headed. Almost immediately, I realized this was a mistake. As they began to talk, something changed. A twisted smile crept along their face, and they revealed themselves as a Yiga assassin. Impa had warned me about them, but I didn't expect to encounter one so soon, especially disguised as an innocent civilian. We clashed sword on scythe, blow for blow as the rising sun crested, lighting the shadows. After a tense struggle, I struck the final blow as he bowed and evaporated, leaving only a few rupees and a bunch of bananas in his wake. What a peculiar encounter. By now our journey was a few hours deep, and I could tell Sanjeet needed to rest, but I had to keep going. As we rounded the next corner, I saw it, the imposing image of another Sheikah tower. I needed this. I tied Sanjeet to a nearby tree and took the journey up the hill on my own. This part of the land was riddled with Calamity Ganon's hellspawn, Lizalfos, bokoblins, moblins, all. Slashing my way through my stash, I had only a few weapons remaining, and the rusted bronze and iron these creatures dropped wasn't taking my fancy either. But that fire rod... I grabbed it from my bag and started swinging it around like a madman, burning everything in my wake as I slowly advanced up the winding hill, approaching the tower. Moblins ran off the cliff screaming in pain, and the bokoblins served no better. When I finally reached the summit, I thought I was home free. But no, one more obstacle stood in my way. The tower was riddled with sharp, rotting brambles that ran around the entire perimeter. Time hadn't been kind to this place. I considered attempting to risk the climb before it finally hit me. The fire rod. I could burn this motherfucker to the ground. So I did. I lit the spark that fanned the flames and watched as the elements started tearing away at this rotted root. But I hadn't been careful enough. A piece of the flame started to lick at my feet and I needed to get away, so I jumped, threw up my paraglider, hoping to escape, and then it happened. The updraft. The tower, now completely alight, swept me along as the fires fanned my ascent to the very top, letting me escape a lengthy, tiring climb. I'd made it. As I looked out and surveyed the landscape in front of me, I saw it just ahead. Hateno Village. We'd made it. I activated the tower, jotted down a few locations on my map, and with paraglider in hand, jumped off towards the village. This adventure had well and truly begun. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, my top 10 games of 2017. This was impossible, but hey, there you go. I feel like this is the least binding list that I'd ever done, and a lot of great games missed the cut. Shout out to Sonic Mania, Wolfenstein 2, Golf Story, Mario plus Rabbids, Horizon Zero Dawn, Splatoon 2, Gorogoa. Just way too many to even speak of. This year has been absurdly good, and we can only hope that next year will be just as excellent. So thank you once again for watching. Do leave a like if you enjoyed, and a comment and all that good stuff. I'll see you next year. Goodbye, everyone.